All right. Go ahead, please, David. Oops, wait a minute. I haven't admitted anybody.
That would help.
I know, I'm sorry.
You're doing fine. Keep going.
Uh,
Okay, I think they're all, except one. Manish, there we go.
okay, I think we're set to go.
Okay, press the recording and I'll start talking.
I did. We're
Oh,
good.
okay, so today, thank you for everybody for continuing the listening, or for those who are returning, and for those who are new. Today will be, these are continued talks on the 10 seed groups. Today we'll be discussing seed group number 7, the scientific servers. Some of the major themes that I'll be covering, among other things in today's talk, will be the tasks of the scientific servers, the convergence of science and religion, science and ethics, and the study of reincarnation and esoteric studies. And there'll be a number of other topics too that I'll be touching on. First of all, the tasks of the scientific servers. In externalization of the hierarchy, GK says the work of this 7th seed group will be carried forward primarily by first ray souls, assisted by 7th ray aspirants, but using 5th ray methods. The 5th ray governs science and it conditions the 3rd and the 5th initiations. The Tibetan has said that the 5th ray will reach its peak during the next 500 years, where the 7th ray will be coming into power and lasting well into the Aquarian era, which also rules the 5th ray. During this time, GK specifies 3 major tasks to be accomplished by this seed group. The first of the major tasks cannot be formed until a certain scientific discovery has been made. That is, the recognizing of the fact of the soul as a creative factor. That's from Discipleship New Age, Volume 1. From this revelation will reveal the essential spirituality of all scientific work, which relates science and religion, and through the medium of God's tangible world and works. This discovery will produce a synthesis between the 3 aspects of divinity upon the physical plane, or between life, solar energies, and the lunar forces, or those forces that have influence on man's personality and his dense physical form. With the fact of the soul established, it would also follow that a study in consciousness would become a subject of major scientific inquiry, including establishing the relationship of spirit and matter as a factor in thinking and perception of God's manifestation. The second major task coming from that GK talked about in externalization of the hierarchy. For seed group 7, the disciples will make a close study of the problem of evil, and they will also bring about a better understanding of the purpose of its purpose existing in matter or substance, and the inflowing, enlightened, and different purpose of the soul aspect. From this will also come an awareness about the inflowing life energies of the soul and its effects on dense matter upon the etheric substance. Through systematic and intelligent observation, scientists will be able to study the motivating energy that penetrates the outer form and discover the one who creates the new forms as an expression of the inflowing spiritual life. This activity allows the scientist to act as a communicator between the human spirit and the energies and forces which make up forms. With this discovery, they will be able to relate the subhuman Deva kingdom with the human kingdom through an understanding of how various forces and energies work together. The scientist, through the use of his intuition, enters into a new realm of thought and will better understand the building forces of the universe, as he will be able to bridge to the abstract mind via the intuition while connecting with the Buddhic intuitional plane, and acknowledge the factual existence of the soul and etheric body. Scientists will be able to study the inflowing illumined purpose of the soul aspect, which can transform evil from within substance. Such a study could also include understanding of the dynamics about how crisis, distress, and catastrophe influence the world's civilization. They can study reincarnation and the law of rebirth by analyzing the energies and forces of the outer garment of form and how it relates to transformation of forms. Additional studies in consciousness and subjective realms will reveal a connection between human behavior, environing conditions, and genetics. This will lead man into the world of meaning and prepare him to live a more deeply conscious spiritual life. For the third major task of the scientists, also talked about in externalization of the hierarchy, scientists will study the nature of the incoming forces during the time of spiritual approaches. They will understand the basics of how these energies and force interact in our world through people and the environment. This will demonstrate the divine quality of forces in nature and humanity and the correct methods for using these forces by humanity for divine purpose. They'll derive spiritual inferences and the nature of those forms of service on the physical plane and will precipitate with rapidity the plan for the immediate present. Using their intuition again, they will blend scientific knowledge, and those energies will further human interest and relate the subhuman kingdoms to the human. By identifying the right interplay of forces, this can help to understand and clear any subjective impediments which have blocked man's approach to the inner plane's work. Now, I'll touch more on these topics in a little more detail as we go on. For the scientific observers, the study of reincarnation. For the scientist, he or she will observe reincarnation as a process that man goes through on the path of evolution. The problem of reincarnation is about identifying the outer garment or appearance of the form and observing how, under the law of rebirth, the old form becomes another form. The soul inhabits the physical and etheric vehicle as solar light and radiation, and upon death, the physical etheric body and the personality dies. The solar and radiatory light of the soul withdraws. The scientists will identify and observe this process. The example of the atomic bomb as the outer appearance. When the bomb explodes, it releases light and radiation into the world and converts the elements in the bomb to other forms. This is a form of rebirth from one form to another. The scientists will acknowledge the path of evolution by studying what evolves in man. First, by observing matter, the lower threefold nature, the centers, and how its vehicles evolve. They'll study energy, the light and the lesser lives made up of devas and elementals that are released and transformed within the form, plus the outgoing study of how quantum physics affects man's thinking and consciousness. They'll develop advanced knowledge on how malignant and evil thought forms such as hate, jealousy, and separation cause fractures in energy in sheaths and human consciousness. This will be the study of cleavage. The result is that the sheaths are being embedded with energies that are not of light and love. Thus, each incarnation is an opportunity to reveal and release the trapped or restricted energy in our sheaths using conscious awareness and techniques as the soul and personality are working together to express the light. I'll talk more about cleavage in a separate slide coming up. According to the Ageless Wisdom teachings, the human soul is drawn to rebirth by desire for perfection. It senses the perfection of the monad or our pure spirit, which desires to acquire experience and full awareness in the densest forms. Through trial and error, stumbling and getting up, man learns, and in so doing expands his awareness of what works, what doesn't. From this, he acquires wisdom. The scientist will observe how the soul reincarnates, choosing and building a suitable physical, emotional, and mental vehicles through which the personality learns the needed lessons. If perfection is not achieved in a particular life, then the soul must return through earthly incarnations and continue the process of releasing astral tendencies. Reincarnation will be discover how karma and its subsequent effects on physical, etheric, astral, and mental sheaths. This would become a study of learning right relationship with each other, with the lower kingdoms, the physical plane, with our soul, and with the hierarchy. The soul gleans and stores experience through its causal body. It is through the development of the mind and the perfected astral nature that wisdom is acquired. The wisdom is eventually available to the monad via the permanent atoms. The scientist will study the centers and their interconnectedness on health and personal psychology. For example, the sacral center, so closely associated with the Lemurian consciousness, and is aligned with the throat center. This will provide a challenge for man to express the will to good and disassociate from the selfish sexual instinct and energy. The sacral energy from the second center provides a drive for regeneration, and it is linked to reincarnation. When motivated by spiritual awareness, the sacral energy redirects the sexual energy for creation and expression through the throat center. Creative energy can be in the form of art, building structures, such as what an architect would do, the drive for a creative spark for making a project work out. I'll talk more about this idea when we get to seed group number 10 in June. Are there any questions at this point?
Nothing so far.
All right, let us proceed. Identifying cleavage in the personality. Scientific observers collaborating with the psychologists, seed group 8, will be able to study and help in understanding how cleavages exist in the personality. That is, connections between the lower and the higher mind. This would also happen after the factual existence of the soul is acknowledged. When the awakening man begins to be motivated by a higher connection with his soul, his attitude and sense of free will changes to cooperation with the higher purpose of the soul. He then begins to shift towards a sense of unity or global consciousness. Cleavage and soul integration. Within the personality, significant cleavages exist between the human consciousness and the divine mind, or the divine consciousness. Man's expressed selfishness creates a blockage to experiencing the unity of the soul and ultimately connecting with the divine. The task of disciples, aspirants, disciples in the world is to fully integrate the lesser self with the soul. This could be accomplished by consciously bridging the gap between the lower mind and manas by building an antakarana. And as we know, the antakarana is a bridge that exists between, it's basically started to be created on the probationary path, and of course is built well into the stages of discipleship going into initiation. And it's basically designed for connecting with the concrete mind through the abstract mind, the higher mind of the soul, and connecting with the spiritual triad via manas. It's a bridge. So we understand that cleavage exists either on subjective or subconscious levels or in the waking consciousness, such as when an individual expresses separation in thought. This can apply for all seekers on the spiritual path. Over the millennia, the lines of cleavage between spirituality, materialism, and subjective understanding has slowly become present, clearer, and apparent. In esotericism, aspirants and disciples are tasked with beginning the work of the soul personality integration during the probationary purification period. This process is continued through the stages of discipleship and culminates at the third initiation, when the personality integrates with the monad. And we reference our first, our handout, which I passed out last fall. The handout is initiations and stages of discipleship. I believe that BL posted that in the chat. The problem of cleavage is about understanding and identifying divisions and separations that exist between a particular vehicle that inhibits or blocks fusion and integration. Although the aspirant may experience crises and a sense of frustration, he or she will learn that the separation is only a temporary condition of consciousness, and it poses the possibility of opportunity and expanded vision. This is a point of spiritually aligned, soul-connected scientists to discover. We note that cleavage can be found in a disassociation between vehicles, such as between the emotional, the sentient part of the self, and the mental aspect. The concept of making and seeing oneself as whole. This idea leads the aspirant disciple to move towards ending the cycle of sense duality and achieve full soul integration. Cleavage can exist between man and his outer environment. So there's a need for him to extend his realization or his interconnectedness and interrelationship with the environment. There's separation exists between the personality and the soul. Here, the abstract mind is observed as not active. So this would be like a person that would be prior to even going on the spiritual path, prior to the probationary path. Aspirants and disciples need to develop the need for reorientation of the personality so it can reconnect with the soul. This would be akin to learning to train oneself to bridge realized cleavages as psychological crises, which are indicative of steps of spiritual progress on the path. And also, cleavages can be found in divisions in one's nature that can be overcome using the as-if technique, such as emulating the energy or thought form the individual wants to become. And this is the other handout I'm referencing to, the techniques for working in consciousness. And both of these two handouts I just mentioned are available on the website for the 10 seed groups for this course. There is also cleavage noted in social and society awareness, such as confronting bigotry and prejudice. Besides the individual cleavage, one also extends to present and historic racial and cultural separation of minorities at the societal level. Esoterically, this is a problem in consciousness, and these continue to exist through anti-Semitism worldwide in Europe, USA, Russia, the Arab world, where Israel is not acknowledged as having a right to exist, or the Jews are fleeing from pogroms in Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. And there's a separating or harmful rhetoric in the United States, Europe, and Russia. There's also the plight of the refugees by international community from war-torn countries such as Syria, Ukraine, and Central American countries. There's the plight of the Palestinians who are without a homeland and are shunned even by Islamic countries. There's the treatment of the Uyghurs and the Tibetans in China. And this is akin to genocide as the way how the Chinese treat them. The international community takes a blind eye to this. These and many other examples show how we must learn to bridge any and all gaps existing between the lower 18 subplanes and the soul, so that a clear path to connecting with the spiritual triad is made available. And this can be facilitated by negating selfishness, hate, and intolerance, and heal it with cooperation, goodwill, and inclusiveness. Any comments or questions?
Not yet.
All right. So continuing on the activity of the scientific observers now and into the future, they will be involved with scientific analysis and observation of human evolution and how it occurs on the cosmic physical plane. So the anthropologist scientists would study, observe, and understand how individuals and groups are going through evolution on the cosmic physical plane, such as observing behavior within civilization, particularly in the lower 18 subplanes. This is already happening in today's world, also with the anthropologists and the psychologists. This could be an unbiased observation of the evolutionary steps man takes as he is evolving, and determine what is evolving or what he is evolving towards and becoming. This could also be the work of the psychologists, as I mentioned. Here, the scientists would study societies and cultures around the world and identify how the awakening process of soul contact and integration would affect people. Scientists would study the subjective nature of how the monad, our pure spirit, expresses through what is called the spiritual triad. They will note how the energies of the Atma, the Atma or pure will, the Buddhi or pure love, pure reasoning and intuition, and Manas or the mental plane are expressed in evolving man through the soul within a given culture. So I hope you can see on this image right here where I move the cursor, you have the Atma is up here, and you have the Buddhi. Buddhi is approximately here, and the Manas aspect is here. It is through the abstract mind that the lower man makes connection with the spiritual triad. And this is best done through meditation. And the soul acts as an intermediary and conduit for energies of the spiritual triad. It radiates and communicates the higher values of harmlessness, love, goodwill, and cooperation through the individual's incarnation. The scientists of the future could observe these energies as light from the soul. Scientists can observe how each of the 7 rays condition and influence the individual groups, the nations, and civilization as a whole. Scientists would study and observe how the individual, when integrated with his higher self, which is first the soul, and then later with the spiritual triad and the monad, is influenced by life of ethical behavior as he interacts with people and groups. Again, be mindful of the connection of the other seed groups, such as how the psychologists and the magnetic healers will facilitate healing of the personality. As many of you probably already know, over the last 30 and 40 years at least, there has been monks that have had have their brain, while they're in meditation, they have their brain observed by scientists and to see how it changes. And they observe how the personality can have expressions of hate by Dr. Emoto in Japan. I don't believe he's alive anymore, but those observations where people observe how hate is observed, or how hate is observed through the water in the brain, for example, and they'll see how it affects consciousness and the expression. So he photographed these images, and he did this for the movie What the Bleep, and you could probably do a search online with Dr. Emoto and water online. The scientists of the future will observe how evolution of leadership and society will evolve, and learn how leaders must be governed by soul impulse and hierarchical inspiration. The level of communication can be through impression of telepathy or both. and allows the individual to work with purpose and intent for carrying out their part of the plan. The leader, the scientist leader, would study the dynamics of how a leader functions, makes decisions, and how he is affected by impression and impulse. So this would be an emphasis also on leadership training. A retrospective studies of influential leaders of the past could be valuable in understanding how they succeeded or failed in tasks and how soul integration could have affected behavior. Perhaps a study of the success and failure of communication could come forward. And the leader and the scientist could observe how they can, from past events, they can learn how to prevent the same problem, crises, issue from happening again. And thirdly, there's the evolution of the group. The individuals in the group, including the nation as a greater group, forms a body or soul that must awaken and purify and act with greater sense of purpose for all their activities. They'll be able to study the soul or a group or a nation and how it could be better brought forward for creating a foundation for peace. They'll be able to observe and analyze how evolution of the 10 seed groups of individuals uses various modes of energy or even methods and the will for carrying out each of its tasks. Any questions or comments?
No, I don't see any, but I did find one of Dr. Emoto's videos. It was called The Water Experiment, Words Are Powerful. And I put the YouTube link in there for everybody to look at.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, continuing. Much of what I'm talking about through these slides is really, it's coming from either externalization of the hierarchy or Giant Discipleship New Age Volume 1, where Alice Bailey or GK, they're talking about the future scientist, what the future scientist will be doing. There is some overlap, and I'm trying to identify what's happening in present time. So the next study would be a scientific study, the evolution of the energy centers and the etheric systems. And this, of course, would be largely after the scientist acknowledges the fact of the soul and the influence of the centers and the etheric energy being the substance or matter that makes up the center or the chakra. There's, of course, many in the esoteric community that already acknowledge this, but the scientific studies are few and far between, and perhaps one of the only people that's studying is Dr. Gene Radin that I know of, with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So we understand that the etheric body is the energy or vital vehicle which interpenetrates and corresponds to the dense physical body. It is a finer level of matter than the dense physical form, and it has 7 major chakras or energy centers, each of which gives us vitality, energy, and life coming from the soul. The chakras correspond approximately to the nervous system and ductless glands, which maintain our life processes. From the spiritual viewpoint, the etheric body is given life in the dense physical world via the Sutratma or life thread originating from the monad. The centers are formed entirely of streams of force pouring down from the soul and act as a conduit from the monad. They are connected with the will aspect of the monad, that is the will to live, or you can say also the will to be. The etheric body receives and distributes force from many different directions, such as from prana, impressions from the abstract mind or soul, psychic impressions or thought forms, and from others through telepathy. The centers are a focal point of energy located in the etheric body. The chakras act as transmitters of certain forms of energy consciously directed by the soul with the intent of driving the physical body to fulfilling the soul's purpose. The everyday man is beginning to function through the solar plexus center. And this is a process that transfers energy and force from the centers below the diaphragm to the centers above the solar plexus. The whole process is one of development, use, and transference. Scientists define the expression and evolution of the energy centers of chakras, particularly for the soul-infused disciple. And this is largely coming from Esoteric Healing, the book by Alice Bailey. For the head center, the expression of the evolution of energy centers is coming via the Antakarana, and it links the personality to the monadic expression, and is impressed with the energy of creative will and divine purpose, or the three aspects. Disciples and initiates understand and are aware that the head center is the locus of shambhalic energies of will as reflected upon the physical plane. All scientific breakthroughs as they enter manifestation via ray 1 will pass through ray 2 and be embodied and expressed with love wisdom of the divine. Herein lies the door to the hierarchical kingdom and its mandates of energy released upon the physical plane via ray 3 as pursuant of the divine plan. The scientific servers will identify and describe via the processes, via fifth ray processes. They'll be via fifth ray processes, there we go. The ideals and ideas basically emanating from a sixth ray influence that man has by placing form or the idea and the subsequent physical matter of that energy via ray 7. So it's a combination of the rays 5, 6, and 7 that will work together to help the scientists to identify energies of the heads working together. For the throat center, this would allow for thought forms and the desire energy to be created and expressed via the concrete mind into a manifested form, using forms flowing from the creative mind to impress themselves within human consciousness as ideas, and subsequently the evolution of said idea or the spoken idea into material form. Man's will to good is tested time and time again through the inventions and creation given life via the throat center. Undoubtedly, the aspirant or disciple must confront his or her own glamours to remove any blockages for clear seeing and knowing. And for the sacral center, which is aligned with the throat center, the challenges man must choose will be the will to good and the creativity over aggressive behavior and selfish motivations. Scientists will identify and teach that an individual must step away from selfish and aggressive existence promulgated by sexual instinct and energy. In the sacral comes the drive toward regeneration, again linked to reincarnation, but we are regenerating for all the wrong reasons, such as for self-survival, chief among them. The individual with spiritual awareness of the soul must come to learn to use the second center as a center for raw sexual motivating energies of creation in combination with the fifth center for creativity. So it's basically moving the raw sexual energy and moving it up to the fifth center for creativity. From this study, scientists will work with psychologists, seed group, in identifying processes and energy activity in the chakras as the personality and soul learn to integrate and fuse. This observation will allow the scientists to be witness to an evolutionary process in man. For any abnormalities or anomalies, remedies can be prescribed for facilitating greater integration with the soul. And as I mentioned before, through the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Dr. Jean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, has been studying how consciousness affects the human mind and how it interacts with the physical world. So overall, the New Age scientists will be able to define and help to understand the existence of the subjective etheric worlds and how the soul interacts with it. He'll provide an understanding that the etheric body is a reflection of the soul in man and links the physical form with the higher Atma, the astral emotional body, and the buddhi with the intuitional plane, and the mental oneness of the spiritual triad. When the individual becomes completely soul infused, connections can then become possible to the higher planes in the solar system. It is instructive for his esoteric students to study the forces and energies which interact through the etheric field and cause the physical form and brain and soul and consciousness to be energized into action. Spiritual workers should learn to subjugate the emotional body, develop his mental powers, and cultivate the faculty of abstract thinking. These actions will over time achieve positive results upon the etheric body and thus eliminate any premature awakening of the centers. Here, the scientists are taking steps to study the nature of consciousness and meditation and how it works with healing in the subjective reality. Any questions as we go on?
No, I don't see anything right now.
All right. So scientific servers and subjective influences. From Externalization of the Hierarchy, GK says, the ashram of the master of the fifth ray of concrete science plays important part to play in the work of preparation for its through scientific use of energy, and that the world will be rebuilt and the factual nature of the hierarchy will be proved. Through the pressure of the second ray, or as pressure of the education second ray, and through the growth of synthesis, the first ray, and through the correct use of energy of the fifth ray, the world can be brought into a condition of preparedness for the externalization of the hierarchy. Thus, scientific work will be carried out by first ray workers, assisted by seventh ray aspirants, but using fifth ray methods. Complicated statement, but it's there in externalization, as he talks about. At the root of the scientific approach is the influence of the fifth ray. It stimulates all mental processes towards elimination and increasing knowledge for guiding humanity in all departments of human thought. GK says Ray 5 has been a major guiding influence of the scientific observers since 1775. It is increasing in potency, and its influence will be guiding humanity in increasing knowledge through scientific inquiry. In Alice Bailey GK's book, in Rays and Initiations, they say Master Hilarion, as the custodian of concrete science and knowledge, oversees activities of the fifth ray ashram. Hilarion supervises and inspires disciples via impression in making scientific discoveries today and removing the veils that obscure the vision of the subjective and etheric worlds. Disciples of Master Hilarion are leading men in the world of meaning and spirituality of all scientific work and discoveries. And this will eventually, as GK says, ameliorate human conditions so that an era of peace and leisure can supervene. This ashram has an important part to play in the work of the preparation of the new civilization, for it is through the scientific use of energy, inventions, and improvements that the world will be rebuilt, and the factual nature of the hierarchy will be proved. GK noted in Treatise on Cosmic Fire, scientists are responsible for advanced application of mechanical science of the needs of men, but that certain types of machinery can have a deleterious effect unless the second petal of love wisdom is open. Allied in this work are two groups, the first and second ray disciples and initiates, to lead mankind into the benefits of the atomic age. And GK comments that the field wherein the hierarchy works is that of energy, that all that we see and produces phenomenal phenomena is energy in relation to the forces directed by energy. On a related note, Master Moria of the First Ray Ashram, he is the custodian of the principle of synthesis, basically working with the seventh ray coming forward. Servers of this ray are those who investigate the form, find its hidden idea and its motivating power, and relate the parts together into an organic fusion. Very seventh ray energy. Master Kuthumi of the second ray ashram provides an influence on the control of the building forces, or devas, that make up matter and energy. Notes from esoteric healing on related subjective influences by scientific servers. The work of the scientists of the fifth ray ashram are closely affiliated with the seventh ray, and it is one of the most practical and physical purposes. Their work is intended to produce a synthesis between the three aspects of divinity, that is, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas upon the physical plane, or between the life, solar energies, and lunar forces. With regards to understanding the dynamics and forces behind the creative impulse, scientists will come to discover who is the destroyer of outgrown forms and learn to penetrate what is behind the outer form to discover its motivating energy. This knowledge will reveal the practical work of the magician or builder who creates new forms as expressions of the inflowing life. From this awareness, the scientists will come to understand religion, or the aspiration to connect with the divine, is concerned with the awakening of conscious purpose of the soul in man or in form. While science is concerned with the activity of the outer form as it lives its own life, the form nature becomes slowly subservient to the purpose of the soul impulse. From these inferences, scientists will formulate those forms of service on the physical plane, which will precipitate the plan into manifestation. From this, the will relate the subhuman lives, that is, the Devic and the human, through the right interplay of forces. After the fact of the soul is acknowledged and the externalization has begun, the impact of these substantial energies on matter will be radically altered, because they will be, for the first time in history, be directed from etheric and the Buddhic plane, which is the lowest of the cosmic etheric levels. At that time, detailed and focused direction will be given for transforming within the three worlds, that is, the mental, emotional, or astral, or physical plane. Any comments or questions at this point?
Nope, we're still good.
All right. So the convergence of science and religion. Again, from externalization of the hierarchy, the Tibetan says that scientists, through a study of the problem of evil, will come to a greater understanding as to its purpose residing in matter or substance. And from this, there will also come an awareness about the inflowing life energies of the soul, its effects on dense matter and etheric substance. This will bring together members of the scientific and religious communities. We understand that religion is concerned with the awakening of the conscious purpose of the soul and form, whereas science is concerned with the activity of the outer form as it lives its own life and eventually becomes subservient to the purposes of the soul. As an observation, when there is combined subjective realization on all planes of the solar system and the 7 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane, GK says in Cosmic Fire, it is this realization which will eventually unite science and religion for what the scientist calls energy, the religious man calls God, and yet the two are one, being but the manifested purpose in physical matter of the great extra-systemic identity. With the scientists of today and into the future, the general theory of evolution, largely or quite often based on Darwinism, the ideas of intelligent design and creationism will be defined and understood by empirical study, evidence and fact-based analysis, such as studying fossil records and through the field of astronomy. After the discovery and acknowledgement of the subjective planes of being in the mainstream media, that is by the trained observers, seed group 2, the psychologists, seed groups 8, educators and healers, and in the public's mind as fact, the scientist will act as a communicator between the human spirit and the energies and forces which make up forms. This will help to introduce humanity to the factual existence of the unseen worlds. With the acknowledgement of unseen forces in science, such as etheric energy, they will come to understand there's a connection between the healthy body, etheric energy, the mind or thought forms, and emotions of subjective realities. Scientists will help to identify, analyze, and catalog physical and subtle environments to prepare for purification and redemption, or subjective energies. Whereas people of religion may pray for healing. So we can observe this happening. This can relate to places where great astral trauma has happened that has left strong energetic traces on the physical planes and should be cleansed. They can help to identify and cleanse the atmosphere, both dense and subtle, such places as Chernobyl, former concentration camps in Europe during World War II, and other places in the world where atrocities have occurred. We can, in today's world, we can cite the work of Thomas Hübl. He's a German mystic. You can do a Google search on his work on the inner planes on the Google. His work, Hübl's work, is of a similar concept with the redemption process for the disciple, where lower energies of the lower 18 subplanes are uplifted through love and contrition. People making up the various religions need to develop within themselves a capacity for knowledge of the real, which is not merely utopian, hopeful, or devotion-driven, but it applies to the power of divine in manifestation for helping to solve problems in the world. For this, members of the world religions need to exercise leadership. We note that mystical or esoteric training, such as soul integration through meditation, helps to cleanse or purify the personality and subjective levels. This would help to bring the lower mind, trained, into a higher realization and understanding. Through self-analysis, again through purification and alignment with the soul, this helps to bring the soul as the dominant factor in consciousness. Also, through scientific training of the mind using mental techniques, the aspirant would develop the lower mind away from fantasy-based thinking and allows the individual to seek pure truth, that is, connection with the real or directly realized consciousness through scientific study and analysis. And this is best done again in meditation. Those esoterically motivated are driven towards finding truth through inquiry in meditation. They understand the importance of impersonality as becoming the observer and negating all that blocks the soul in soul connection, such as removing cleavages, as mentioned before. The combination of scientists and people in the field of religion are already helping to focus the green and environmental movements for protecting the earth as stewards. And as an aside, Pope Francis, as a trained biochemist, in many ways, Pope Francis has acknowledged science as a way for learning and means for living in the world. Over the years, he has He has urged governmental leaders and everyday people around the world to care more for the environment and the reality of climate change. Many of his messages, called encyclicals, state that we need to move away from the attitude of having dominion over the earth, but instead encourage stewardship with it. Any questions or comments?
Oh, no.
All right, let's continue here. Science and education. Today, science education is often around technology and how it can be applied in a specific discipline of science. Also, science technology studies depend on the teacher's ability to integrate philosophy, scientific knowledge, science knowledge, and education in a meaningful way. In today's world, science and technology studies consist of research on the nature and practices of science and technology as a positive trend, with emphasis on development of academic, technical skills and knowledge of science and understand how it contributes to society. With the appearance of Sputnik by the Soviet Union in the 1950s, this caused the then Eisenhower administration to declare that the American children were behind the rest of the Western world in STEM education. STEM, S-T-E-M, stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This type of education emphasizes technology and integrates subjects in ways that connect disciplines and relate them to each other. Since that time, education in the US has geared toward training students in science, engineering, and mathematics to better compete through the sciences. Thus, it has become a political counterweight to compete against Russia, or even China for that matter. Girls and women in STEM. From the American Association University Women website, I quote, "Girls and women are systematically tracked away from science and math throughout their education, at least in the United States. This limits their access and preparation for opportunities to go into these fields as adults. By giving women equal opportunities to pursue and thrive in STEM education careers helps narrow the gender gap, the pay gap, and emphasizes women's economic security. And it ensures a diverse and talented STEM workforce and prevents biases in those fields and products and services they produce." Obviously, the concept of equality for all, this is a major theme throughout esotericism. It negates separatism, isolation, exclusivity, and bigotry. The dark side of science and technology, particularly in today's world, many science and engineering students apply their brilliance and knowledge by working and developing weapons for the government. For example, many scientists, such as Fritjof Capra's discoveries in physics, were applied toward developing Star Wars technology. The defense contractors in the United States, such as Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, General Dynamics, Boeing, and NASA, have since the 1950s looked to universities for recruits for people to work in defense contracting, which is largely to do with developing weaponry. Since the space shuttle program in the 1970s and 1990s, there has been numerous secret and classified missions, one of which was to launch a new series of spy satellites for the military that used radar to observe ground targets, for military purposes, of course. The concept or idea that nuclear weapons acted as a deterrent of war or to war, and ironically helped promote diplomacy between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But up to the late 1980s, the United States and Soviet Union dedicated a sizable government budget toward developing weapons to counter each other in the event of conflict. The point here is that monies were spent on weapons and military applications that promote war that could have been spent on peaceful pursuits. They could have been spent on free education, ending poverty, universal health care, free energy, and other life-giving activities. So the funding or defunding of science and research and development and science education in the new age. Funds in the new age will be allocated toward all activities and the sciences that promote life and deflected from funding military, except for defense, and defunding any activity that promotes conflict and separatism in society. Scientists of the future will work with Seed Group 4 educators and Seed Group 5, the political observers, to help define education standards and the needs and right allocation of funding. This would also require politicians to understand the technology and ask intelligent questions prior to funding. Scientists will also work with seed groups, the trained observers, the healers, the political organizers, and the psychologists to promote activities that communicate the benefits scientists give to society and civilization. So the promotion of science and society by different seed groups further is like Seed Group 2, the trained observers, or the broadcast journalists will promote good journalistic practices, present factual scientific truth, and straight understanding of science without editorial comment, of course. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson, an astronomer, reports scientific insights in astronomy in where he tries to demystify science. His presentations are most not distorted from political ends. Seed Group 3, the magnetic healers, will work with all forms of healing, physical and the etheric body. They will communicate allopathic, Ayurvedic, and alternative medicine in a clear and factual manner. Seed Group 4, the educators of today and into the new age, will place emphasis on STEM education and teaching the value of society and the ethical research and activity. Their emphasis will be on developing mental cognitive ability, thus focusing or teaching the individual to focus mentally and away from astral digression. Seed Group 5, the political organizers or observers, will help with the appropriation of funds for research. They would be involved with the necessity for working with government officials to be educated and understand science and ask the right questions, as I mentioned before. The psychologists, Seed Group 8, they would be studying ethics and the effects of stress in the body and the personality and different forms of psychotherapy. And keep in mind that many of the seed groups mentioned are driven by fifth ray impulse for espousing scientific inquiry and the mental approach in their field. Comments or questions?
Not yet.
All right. So let's talk about perspectives on sustainability. This is a discussion about how scientists are tuning into the depletion of the Earth's natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. Concept of sustainability effectively began back in the 1960s, where some individuals wanted to get away from the mainstream civilization and live, quote, off the grid from this desire and acquired wisdom about living with the natural environment. This gave birth to the modern environmental movement. From this sprung many industries and understandings about how we must care for the earth in its myriad forms. Sustainability also means learning about how to meet the needs of civilization of today, but not compromise the needs of future generations for meeting their needs. Making these changes helps protect animals, plants, and our natural resources so that future generations will inherit a safe, healthy planet to live and thrive on. So obviously we're talking about man being the fourth kingdom interacting with the lower three kingdoms, basically the animal, the vegetable, and the mineral kingdoms. Some principles of sustainability are around 6 different principles or more. Circular economy, learning how to improve resource efficiency through better waste management and recycling. These are all happening in today's world. This involves reusing, or recycling waste from consumer and industrial waste, such as recycling products, such as paper, glass, metals, electronics. as much as possible in cutting down on the landfill pollution, especially in the land, the air, and the water. Another principle of sustainability is energy savings, using efficient devices to employ better use of energy and save resources over time. And understand that the concept of sustainability is a relatively new science, basically in the last 30 years. And right here, I'm here in Arizona, and Arizona State University is one of the acknowledged centers on the planet for sustainability. They even offer graduate degrees in this. Another principle of sustainability is the concept of using sustainable material choices, such as in building products that originated from sustainable sources. For example, if you use wood, then the wood would come from a forest that is renewable and well maintained. Or you would have materials that would go into construction of a building that would not pollute or that would help to reduce energy. You will have also an environmental product declaration. In the last 30 years, many products from consumer to industrial are labeled with environmental friendly, meaning they are made from renewable sources. The label certifies this. You can actually go to places like, for people in the United States, you can go to places like Home Depot and Lowe's, and you can look or ask, or even certain products that have a sustainable or renewable label on it, and you can see what that looks like. Another principle of sustainability is the concept of constant research and innovation. This is about developing and implementing renewable and clean energy across society. It is now very common for new homes to have devices such as light switches, appliances, and solar panels that are energy efficient and save home or business the owner money or energy use. For example, motion sensors. When you walk into a room, the motion sensor will turn off or on the light. This can also refer to developing products for the building trades, which are inexpensive and are efficient and are energy efficient. And there's also corporate social responsibility, and this refers to corporations or individuals in government who are willing to participate in protecting the environment. So this is a consciousness, this is a mental, conscious choice they are making to do this. This may involve governments, regulations, or regulating the coal and oil industries, and these corporate entities are acting responsibly to protect the environment as a matter of practice and policy. On a consumer level, we have the concept of sustainable transport, such as electric vehicles, bus or car. It could even be the post office is using their delivery vehicles too. Vehicles that get higher gas mileage or miles per gallon and burn less carbon. For the consumer, there's also supporting local and organic foods, supporting green vendors, organic foods with a certification label also, that are better for the body, have no pesticides or GMOs, genetically modified products. This supports growers to continue making organic products by buying these products. There's the concept of sustainable water usage, being efficient about using water, using drip system for plants and growing gardens, installing a reverse osmosis system for purifying and eliminating harmful pollutants in the water. Waterless toilets. This could also extend to only planting plants that grow in your area and using less water, such as xeriscapes, or here in the Southwest. Xeriscape, for those who don't know, is basically an area which is using minimal water and using plants that are local in the local area. And it could also be using what is it called? Reclaimed water, yeah. The effective, let's see, another on the consumer level, there could be effective land use and wildlife protection. This would involve managing forests by trimming waste and preventing or minimizing fire. There could be regulations on protecting wildlife from illegal or overhunting animals and or fish. At the governmental level, For years on a governmental level, the European Union, for example, the EU, has been a global leader in sustainable practices. In 2021, they have created an economic package of measures that helps to improve the flow of money towards sustainable activities across the countries of the EU. This initiative enables investors to reorient and channel money towards more sustainable technologies and businesses, which will be key in making Europe climate neutral by the year 2050. On another related topic on a governmental level, which I'll go into more in May's talk, when we talk about the financial services group, that sustainability is not just about protecting the planet. There's a political element where we can change our dependence on oil and petroleum. The West's dependence on oil has a geopolitical consequences dating from the late 19th century. For today, a large chunk of Russia's revenue is based on the West's need for oil. If the West moved from oil to more sustainable technology, this has enormous consequences for the economies of Arab nations, Russia, and Venezuela, who all depend on oil for a significant revenue source. In so many ways, the concepts of sustainability evolved from an understanding on practicing harmony, awareness, and intentionality in thought and behavior in one's life and for the planet. As esotericists, we know we must practice harmlessness. It is well understood that when relationships break down, this leads to disease in the mental, emotional, and astral etheric. Our bodies, just as the earth, are also an environment where there is right relationship established between the mind, the emotions, the personality of the soul, to the soul, with right attitude and caring for the physical form. Any comments or questions here?
Nope, not yet.
All right. Let's move on. Challenging the existing paradigm. Albert Einstein said, "We cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." The concept to touch on here is challenging the existing paradigm in the scientific field. Now, what I'm going to talk about here can be broad and applied to many different aspects of science, particularly in today's world. Scientific research is often sanitized, and workers are limited on what they can say or what they can research within a discipline, within their discipline, for that matter. Global warming versus climate change versus global cooling. There's a debate, what is causing climate change? Some say NASA has info that the sun has reduced its solar output and is in a cooling cycle. This directly affects the Earth's weather. Others point to man as being the chief culprit to global warming and climate change, such as emitting carbon emissions over the last century. From the EPA.gov website, to suppress science is to obstruct policy reform and thus impede change. And without change, polluting policies and practices of man will continue to exacerbate the impacts of climate change. In the early 2000s, the administration of President Bush deliberately manipulated science on climate change. This was the problem of climate change was observed easily going back to at least the 1970s and 80s. So President Bush and his administration deliberately manipulated science on climate change to suit their political agenda. This is available, it was written, or as an article by the Union of Concerned Scientists back in the early 2000s. The point here is that with new findings or discoveries, such as on climate studies from a particular scientist or research, the findings can be misconstrued and watered down to create mistrust regarding the authenticity of results. For this, people,
Dave,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Um, you have a comment or a question here by Salandria that I think fits in really well with what you're talking about and what you just talked about. It says, in the case of using smart devices like dimming or turning off lights, this is using smart houses and devices and using increased EMF like 5G plus. And this seems like a harm, either not considered or abusive use. What do you think?
Well, certainly these devices, like for example, a motion sensor switch, which can turn on lights, or even lock a door, or they have certain things where you clap your hands and certain things take place. Voice activated dots, DOT, made by Amazon, give you music or give you the weather or news. These things all have a positive effect. But they also certainly could have a negative effect too. It depends on how they're applied. And since ethics are not fully, well, let's just say they're not even really in place yet in the world, except by isolated people or groups. We can't really rely on any device being developed or created or available to the mainstream public. We can't rely on its use being applied toward positive means. So we can only hope that that's the case. So I hope I answered your question. I personally am skeptical until we have the right spokespersons telling us reliable or verifiable and truthful information. Obviously, that's a loaded word, the word truthful. I talked about the word truthful going back to Seed Group 5. Let's see, that would be January, February with the political observers. And I believe I also talked about it with Seed Group 2, which I believe that would be with October as trained observers, Group 2. And these are all available on the, excuse me, they're all available on the Seed Group website. Any other questions or comments?
No, that's it for now.
All right. So continuing with new findings and discoveries on climate studies, for example. Let's see. So for this, people of science must align with truth and not be motivated by selfish gain, as I was alluding to, and be able to define what is beneficial to humanity. Certainly promoting empirical data supports the higher viewpoint. So we're basically talking about people with a higher level of ethics. One of my favorite expressions is that we need people and spokespersons in all the seed groups who are accountable, who are transparent, work with ethics, and beyond corruption. So this will apply for all the seed groups. So for talking about or challenging the existing paradigm for the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been going on since 2020. In 2020, President Trump, in his administration here in the United States, manipulated the Food and Drug Administration to hastily approve the unapproved drugs such as hydrochloroquine and Remdesivir. By suppressing science, whether by delaying publication or cherry picking favorable research or gagging scientists, is a danger to the public health. And this has taken place during several of the last presidential administrations here in the United States. Globally, people, policies, and procurement are being corrupted by political and commercial agendas because, like I say, ethics are not, corruption and ethics are not happening. So how might science be safeguarded from these changing times? The first step is full disclosure of competing interests from government politicians, science advisors, and appointees, such as the heads of test and trace and diagnostic trace procurement and vaccine delivery. The next step is full transparency about decision-making systems and processes and knowing who is accountable for what. Governments and industry must also stop announcing critical science policy by press releases, and that they should be informed or guided by science when they are deciding policy for the public. The challenges to the existing paradigm will only be successful when advocates secure positions of authority necessary to change institutional arrangements, basically people that are working with ethics once again. In the field of anthropology, social development of civilization, Darwinism versus archaeological evidence that man developed differently, and its acceptance. We observed that the ongoing archaeological digs in Göbekli Tepe, which is basically 60 miles from the Syrian border in Turkey. This is evidence of the oldest social and religious community that predates other Neolithic sites by thousands of years. So the activity, the archaeological digs at this site of Göbekli Tepe go back 12,000 years. And this is being accepted more and more, but it's still upending the fields of anthropology and social development. In the field of Egyptology, we're talking again about the challenges to the existing paradigm. In the field or the science of Egyptology, Robert Bauval wrote a book called Breaking the Mirror of Heaven, the conspiracy to suppress the voices of ancient Egypt. And he wrote about the destruction, the vandalizing, and the cultural suppression of ancient Egyptian monuments in Egypt from antiquity to the present day. Approximately 2015, Tutankhamun's tomb could contain certain chambers discovered with ground-penetrating radar technology, and it was used by the National Geographic Society, and it possibly could confirm the remains of the riches of Queen Nefertiti. But the Egyptian government, the existing Egyptian government, has suppressed the findings. Such a finding could undermine the official government's historic data on the ancient site. So we're talking about the government of Egypt itself could be an actual impediment toward bringing forth factual information about ancient Egypt and its history. There is a continual denial by mainstream Egyptologists and the Egyptian government of the science, technology, and the age of the Great Pyramid. John Anthony West, Robert Bauval, Graham Hancock are examples of archaeologists who presented new ideas on the Egyptian civilization and they challenged traditional Egyptology. Archaeological evidence is missing to prove the building of the Great Pyramid, by traditional Egyptologists. There's no technology today that can match the precision of the cut stones, the drill holes, and the saw cuts that are found within the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau. Helena Blavatsky, she says, I believe it was in the collected writings, she says the Great Pyramid was built over 30,000 years ago, not 5,000 years ago back, as traditional Egyptology says. There's evidence of water corrosion, thousands of years predating the Old Kingdom, which was 5000 BC. This was observed and written about and described by John Anthony West. There's another website, there is a website called megaliths.org showing anomalies in history, which is all over Europe and Asia and also in South America. Mainstream science really doesn't want to look at this, as they provide examples of building structural design that cannot be explained by today's science. Scientists don't want to acknowledge the Great Pyramid, the structure of the Incas or the Aztecs were built with advanced technology, which has been lost. Just for your information, the websites, I'm actually citing different websites in this particular slide, which when you can go to the 10 Seed Group's website afterwards and get this PowerPoint, and the websites will be in there.
And I gave him early on the I put the PowerPoint in the notes so they could download it
Oh, fabulous. That's great. Okay.
if they were able to do it. I also want to say that Salandria did follow up after your comments, and she said, so we should do our own work and investigation for whatever is presented.
Well, in a certain comment, by doing your own investigation is an excellent idea. You're taking a mental approach. You're not just trusting what somebody says. You're taking a mental approach and you're confirming the information yourself. And you're also informing yourself about what the labels are on certain sustainable products and about organic products too, you find in the supermarket. So this is expanding your mind and your awareness about certain things too. So yes, that's an excellent should be made. Any other comments or questions?
No, not for right now.
All right, let's continue. Science and ethics. The concept of ethics is an ongoing discussion that broadly applies to all the seed groups, but seems particularly applicable towards seed group 7, the scientific observers or workers. From Alice Bailey's books, The Reappearance of the Christ, she comments, the mysteries contain within their formulas and teachings the key to the science which will unlock the mystery of electricity, the greatest spiritual science and area of divine knowledge in the world. The mysteries are, in the last analysis, the true source of revelation. It can only be when the mind and the will to good are closely fused and blended and are thus conditioning human behavior, that are the extent of the coming revelation can be safely grasped. With regards to ethics, as esotericists, we observe and ask how this form of energy or this widget, this object, this device, whatever, is used and when implemented and how it influences or changes human behavior. We should ask, does it promote and result in better human relations, truth, accountability, transparency, and how people relate to each other in society? In mainstream psychology, ethics is a branch of philosophy that deals with morality and how it shapes behavior in our everyday lives. Here are some major ideas on ethics. One is called utilitarianism. According to the theory of utilitarianism, people choose their actions based on how their decisions will benefit most people. From this mindset, the benefit of decisions is the biggest factor. If the individual does not have a spiritual or moral base, his or her actions cannot be predicted. If ethically or spiritually based, then this individual would have an inner inclination or motivation towards performing actions that benefit society, that is, for engaging all activities that promote right human relations. And there's also the rights theory. This says that people make decisions based on the rights that society agrees to, such as what are the rights of the Constitution gives us. This form of ethics comes largely from those nations who are functioning democracies and that allow the individual a considerable measure of freedom to act in a certain way. As we know, these rights are not implemented globally, and there's a great abuse and misunderstanding as to their meaning. The last branch would be called virtue. The ethical theory of virtue is about how the individual's character and morality are shaped by how his or her life is lived. For this form of ethics, a person who lies and cheats to get ahead in life probably makes decisions based on advancing his or own interests. Esoterically, we understand that this is practicing separative behavior, creates karma, and does not promote a cooperative attitude and negates the principle of sharing. Although many scientists are spiritually guided and work primarily for the benefit of humanity, there are also those who work for personal notoriety or monetary gain. Such an attitude might easily land such workers in the hands of the dark forces, with the result that inventions or discoveries which were intended for beneficial purposes may, at least temporarily, be reapplied to man's detriment. And I alluded to this before, where, so for example, Friedrich Capra in his book Turning Point, and how his discoveries in physics were distorted toward creating the Star Wars weaponry, which is basically particle beam technology, against his wishes. On the other hand, there is an offshoot inventions and technologies that were developed by the military that have provided tremendous benefits to society, such as integrated circuitry, microwave ovens, water filters, DVRs, photography technology, scratch-resistant lenses, memory foam, cell phone technology, to name a few. These were all developed ultimately by NASA originally from the 1960s forward. We have the development of nuclear power in the 1930s, which led later to the creation of nuclear technology, namely nuclear bombs and nuclear plants, now prevalent around the world. Although it provides the nuclear plant, although it provides electricity for hundreds of millions worldwide, it is also a source of great waste and pollution. Following the earthquake and tsunami of 2011 in Japan, nuclear power plants, such as the one in Fukushima, leaked nuclear fuel and contaminated the area, and it's still ongoing and resulted in deaths, evacuations, and a health crisis in Japan. And of course, we know very well about the crisis of Chernobyl in 1986 in Ukraine, and 3 Mile Island meltdown of their nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania in 1979. There is for other types of research, there is cloning and stem cell research. And so questions arise about who should benefit from this. Should specific kinds of biotechnology research, such as gene editing or changing a baby's genetic characteristics and the effects of cloning animals, should this go forward? Social scientists generally agree that people's interactions, both genetic and environmental, can influence their environmental influences. They explain individual differences in antisocial behavior. Regarding genetics, it's an ethical discussion that arises from the idea that if one is wealthy, one can afford the science and can cherry pick the right genes for creating the perfect child, or the government can create the perfect soldier. There are those who are solely interested in the financial benefit from the product or invention, and how their intellectual ideas or invention may be commercialized or even created to the detriment of society. For example, the invention of the plastic bag that does not decompose easily, which also involves products such as plastics that are created that are basically based on they're created by for a throwaway society. They create a problem for pollution and for recycling, as we know. There are those in the field of developing drugs like big pharma, such as COVID vaccines, making overnight billionaires of the CEOs who did this, like, for example, Pfizer and Moderna, for example. There's a case of ethics about that, perhaps, about promoting drugs and opioids that kill people instead of being addicted, that makes people addicted, such as the big pharma that created the opioid Oxycontin, I believe, and they're being sued, and they're become responsible for that. With the dawning of the new age, we are still a long ways away from curtailing destructive behavior by individual groups or even nations. Through the activities of spiritually minded people and responsible scientists, they will be able to shape ethical research for bringing forth accountability and right behavior that benefits society and helps to enable the plan. Are there any comments or questions on this?
Yes, there's a couple. I want to read what Salandria said, but I think you pretty much covered what it was she was saying anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
And she says, what about when there is new technology that appears to be made available for the benefit of others that gets taken over by the dark forces? This happens many times in history. And then you talked about that, and she says, I guess that is to your point.
Yes, it's just simply you can create a create a pen or a pencil, and each one of these can become a weapon if they're projected as a projectile. I mean, it's just that's a bizarre way of looking at it, but just know that any object, even a gun, can be a neutral object. It can be used for target practice only, but no, as we know, the gun is developed largely as a weapon for defense or offense. And we know about the effects of guns or weapons in the world for that example. Other questions?
Yes, Jessica says, I'm interested in how technology has been developed faster than strong ethical and moral values in humanity. This is when harmfulness is most likely. These are precarious times indeed.
Well, it's pretty much it's pretty much, I already answered this basically in this slide and the last slide, that the concept of ethical behavior. What is the person who developed this, who may be just they could be like Watson and Crick back in the 1950s. They were basically party-going scientists. They were part-time scientists who discovered the DNA gene. And so, and as we know, that DNA came forth to, which helped to found all sorts of understandings about how the science is made up of the human genome, who we are, what we are as human beings on a physiological level. And then, of course, you can apply this toward gene technology, manipulating genes going forward. So, it has a light and a dark side, but right now we need to have people that are grounded in ethics and right human behavior, and who are looking out for the benefit of humanity, and knowing that their discovery certainly can be applied toward selfish ends. And there's really no way to control that in today's world so far. Go ahead.
That's all I see. But I agree with them. We see so many of these great things that are supposed to help people that are then taken over for nefarious reasons, whether it is the secret weapons of militaries, or whether it's to monetize it as much as they can at the expense of the poor people who really need these innovations. But then I also see that there are so many people of goodwill around the world who are actively saying, enough of this, we must have those ethics that you're talking about. We must have right distribution, right human relations. It cannot be all about stepping on someone else as you get to the top of the ladder. So, that heartens me that we see so much of that activism out there.
So on an esoteric level, to address what you just said, we're basically bringing forth the three aspects. We're bringing forth the will. I say, I see something damaging out there, so therefore I am going to contact my congressman or senator or spokesperson in the media or whatever to bring forth this knowledge and get it fixed. That's active intelligence. Also, the third aspect, my connection with my heart. I love people. I love humanity. I love the environment. I don't want this device, this widget, this person abusing this thing of majig. I don't want this to be done because my heart is hurting from this. So there's the third aspect. So you have all three aspects are involved on an esoteric level. So people that get involved in society in today's world, we do what we can. We're trying to instill right sense of values and understanding and cooperation and goodwill across all the seed groups. And this is going toward our behavior as we go toward our esoteric community, as we move toward connecting with the greater group humanity. We bring it in our own family, we bring it through our government as much as we can, of course, depending upon your government. So we're putting these energies out there. It's going through the inner plane. So just know that we are connected in that level. It's just, we have to become the spokespersons ourselves for the time being, until there is greater spokespersons that come forth and represent ethics through all the seed groups. It is coming, but we have to do the work initially. So let us continue. Prophecies and discoveries. For new approaches of science now into the new age, scientists will be center stage in playing a role for the upliftment of humanity. As I mentioned before, one of the things they'll be talking about will be the factual existence of the soul. The acknowledgement that with the discovery of the soul, scientists will reveal that life, light, and electricity, these will come to be expressions of the divine life. From Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1, Alice Bailey, GK, they talk about the fact that the soul will eventually be proved through the study of light and of radiation and through the coming evolution in particles of light. Scientists will study the relationship between life and matter. Scientists will study the atomic structure of matter in the etheric body, its structure to be identified as magnetic and radioactive by the soul through the gradual evolutionary development of consciousness. The coming new physics, where force and energy will be studied, and on how they play on dense matter, and further discoveries in quantum fields and electromagnetism, magnetic waves, and vibrations. This would be a continual study in going forward in quantum physics. The soul will be known as an entity and the motivating impulse and the spiritual center behind all manifested forms. There'll be an acknowledgement that our life force and the soul is electrical in nature, and by its nature, it stimulates and animates our chakras, our consciousness, and is behind all healing forces. Through the harnessing of the fifth ray, the disciple, initiate, healer, working scientifically and largely on concrete levels, will render healing on the subtler levels where dwells the soul. This would affect the whole of the psychotherapy, medicine, and healing. I talked about this, of course, in, let's see, was that November, I think. November when I talked, November when I talked about esoteric healing, Seed Group 3, and that's on the website, 10 Seed Group's website. And let's see, harnessing the fifth ray, the disciple, initiate, healer will also, there's a book from Lucis Trust called The 7 Rays of Life. It's a compilation where, quoted, all work becomes spiritual when rightly motivated, when wise discrimination is employed and soul power is added to the knowledge gained in the 3 worlds. So the Tibetan predicts scientists will develop etheric vision, allowing the scientist to observe and acknowledge phenomena the esotericist has long since understood. And with this prediction, this would entail identification of what GK calls the 4th ether, or acknowledgement of etheric matter and how it's made up of Deva substance and energy, and their efforts on the centers and how the forces from the soul influence. This form of vision will allow the scientific observers to see and observe subjectively of how the Deva kingdom makes up forms, that they are building forces of matter, and provide analysis of their modes of building. It'll further be an understanding of how various forces and energies work together. With this discovery, the scientific workers will relate the subhuman kingdoms with the human kingdom through the right interplay of forces. The discovery will enable the deeper observations of inner subjective connections, for example, the building of the Antakarana, which has hindered humanity's approach to connecting with the spiritual triad and the hierarchy. It will lead to the creation of the new field of science. This will lead to a creation of a new field of science that combines the heart, the soul, and the body together, probably energy-based healing. In today's world, we are already having an understanding of the concept of the interrelationship of man with the various kingdoms as a form of cause and effect. This gave birth to the sciences of ecology and sustainability. This knowledge will aid the scientists in a new way in observing the process of physical planetary evolution through the physical sciences of climate change, the science of climatology, meteorology, geology, and ecology. So for regarding prophecies and discoveries and social activities in the healing and new approaches to sciences, there will be an understanding about how the release of light composed of truth and knowledge and thought form energy is acknowledged as the light of illumination or intuition coming from the plane of the intuition. With this knowledge, scientists can expand their awareness in the field of consciousness studies. From esoteric healing, GK says medical practices in the new age will eventually know enough to relate those various ray forces to their appropriate centers and know that which type of force or ray is responsible for conditions, both good or bad, in a particular part of the body. They will work with seed group 8, the psychologists, in observing and understanding the nature of cause and effect and how the forces of goodwill, altruism, or even the forces that separate are powerful forces for change. These acts could be studied and understood as to how it aids or deters, that is, as a consequence, and how force or energy interact. They will study the law of karma and how it affects individual behavior and society. Subjective understanding, which would be science and psychology together, that money is an energy that is directed via thought form energy. I'll talk about more of this in next month's talk. They will be equating altruism as being is about converting money into goods and services for those in need, such as, for example, such as buying vaccines for those in need around the world or for disaster relief. Using financial services as monies and energies, as a means for leverage for example, in today's world, right up to the minute, for deterring Russia and other belligerent entities not to go to war, such as what with Russia with Ukraine. The secular only understands this dynamic on the physical plane through cause and effect, but esotericists understand it as manipulation of thought form energies too. There'll be a connection established subjectively and energetically understood between antisocial behavior and genetic inheritance. And there's a website for this too, which you'll see when you get the link to this talk. It's long established observations and understanding of psychologists and sociologists that the environment with poor education, poor healthcare, and poor nutrition, and exposure to destructive elements or persons contributes to antisocial and destructive behavior, and therefore a breakdown in parts of society, such as through crime, gun violence, domestic violence, selfish behavior, and causing neuroses in people. They will be social scientists and psychologists, will work with advanced thinkers in all the seed groups to help create new hypotheses for identifying the next steps forward in any field of science for precipitating the plan with an ethical focus. And this will help to formulate and concretize forms of service and identify any impediments or glamours to overcome. Any comments or questions?
Yes. Salantria says, could there be a higher vibration created with the energies that are created in devices and etc. So it can control the lower vibration in an esoteric way.
Well, that has to do with you're going to have to find an engineer to or some type of person to study and analyze the device or the widget or uh, the product or product or service, and they have to analyze it from an ethical point of view, perhaps even from a spiritual point of view of the concept of right relations and whether it's harmless or not, and then devise that new direction for that device or service. I mean, that's what it has to be. Again, you can take a gun for offensive purposes and harming people, or you can use a gun just for target practice. I mean, that's already been figured out, that one. But you have to come from a particular viewpoint, and you have to probably come from a point of view of an observer and re-engineer something or repurpose it for a stronger ethical foundation, basically coming from a point of view of harmlessness.
And that's all I see
All
right
right.
now.
Okay, we're running short on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this slide, and then we'll go to the conclusion. Okay, scientific servers and disease regarding the current COVID pandemic. Yes, it still is ongoing. In the initial outbreak of the pandemic in 2020, the World Health Organization coordinated and invited international cooperation and shared data with scientists, physicians, and drug manufacturers around the world to develop vaccines, as we know, to curb the spread of the COVID virus. Through voluntary enforced action in society, such as social distancing, hand washing, and wearing masks, this has represented an overt and subjective form of purification and a lesson in the right use of the heart and mind. These actions are designed for and related to the COVID-19 virus. So the pandemic has presented us with the possibility of moving toward greater awareness in how to work on the inner and the outer planes. It has been a time for demonstrating how right human relations has and has not worked out. The challenge then has been one of voluntary cooperation and psychological reorientation. Overall, the pandemic has shown humanity the possibility of how we can move towards greater awareness, such as caring for the health of the self, the family, and others in the immediate environment. Through these actions of scientists working with politicians and government officials, they facilitate right political management of ideas and pro-social behavior. They have the power to impact and break up and destroy old forms that hinder, which is basically a first-ray energy coming in this case from the politicians, as they have the power of authority. Their intent is to make room for new emerging ideas. Ideally, their activity is a form of truth through knowledge, bringing conscious awareness towards others, such as encouraging the public to wear a mask and practicing social distancing. Individual to practice is helping himself and others, as we know. Well, as of this date, over 950,000 Americans in the United States alone have died. And that's just in the United States alone. I don't know how many millions have died worldwide. And obviously the results of hand washing, pro-social behavior, just social distancing and wearing a mask, the results have been mixed. In an effort for finding a vaccine to the virus, scientists approached the pandemic by applying a mental understanding. That is, presenting factual scientific data and negating reactivity to the public. Since early 2021, the expression of the fifth ray has been a driving influence in the public's eye. The scientists and the political observers, seed group 5, coordinate with seventh ray workers to help other ray types be successful during the rollout of vaccines and facilitate economic recovery efforts. This is done ideally with right logistical management and cooperation. Now, I'm very specific about how I describe this because I want you to see that, that esoteric understanding, like a seventh ray outlook and fifth seed group work activity and seventh seed group scientific activity. These people are coordinated activities, and they're not just subjective energies that are working. They are subjective, but they're also working with the outer planes too. So they are working already in the world. On a social level, for remaining healthy during the pandemic, scientists have encouraged individuals to be responsible for protecting their health and others by following the guidelines, such as we mentioned, with wearing a mask and getting the vaccine. Regarding disease and not just COVID, from esoteric healing, the Tibetan says, all disease is a result of inhibited soul life, as is true for all kingdoms and all forms. In essence, disease appears where there is a lack of alignment or harmony that exists between the form life, the life aspect of the soul. For inhibited soul life, this also refers to an understanding that by not practicing cooperation and goodwill, disharmony will block the life of the soul from coming through and guiding the individual's consciousness. So some of this information that I put out here is very obvious, and of course that's what it is, but I'm trying to instill the concept that we have a mental approach toward this, and we have a mental approach toward the subjective understanding, toward outwardly worldly activity. There's also studies and understanding about how the addition of food additives and hormones, they are a means that have influenced health over the last century, which have possibly led to increase in autism, breast and prostate cancers over the last decade. And of course, we know about lead in pipes and how that affects brain chemistry in children, for example, cognitive abilities. For esotericists, it's important to become consciously aware about the energies or activities that influence and impact their mental, emotional, and physical vehicles. We need to study and comprehend the effect of thought forms and emotions and how they are causing inertia and preventing right flows of prana through the chakras within the nervous system. Study the science of the centers and the chakras and the movements of etheric energy through the body. We need to study, as esotericists, how goodwill, the action of the will to good, and right intention and motive help to heal diseases in respiratory tract, in the lungs, the throat, and stabilize cells in the brain and cure addictions and obsessions, glamours. This is an acknowledgement that the use of the mind is a major factor to contribute to an individual's health. Patient, heal thyself, and learn to have a healthy attitude about your own health through right foods and exercise. This is the concept, energy follows thought. And I'm going to move straight on to, I have another slide here, the sciences of esotericism, but I'm going to pass on that, let you look at that separately because we're running out of time here. I'm just going to go straight to the my concluding slide here, the accomplishment of the scientific servers, then I'll take your quotes and comments and questions. Science should work for the pursuit and implementation of those discoveries that benefit, uplift, and propel civilization into an ethical and creative expression with cooperation and harmlessness at its core. This involves investigating and acknowledging the building forces of the universe, the existence of the soul, and the energies of the etheric body. Through these studies, the scientists will be able to bridge to the abstract mind and connect to the Buddhic intuitional plane, thus expand his etheric vision for direct knowing. After these discoveries are accepted, the scientist will act as a communicator between the soul and the human spirit and the energies and forces which make up forms. This type of observation would require the scientist to look into the etheric realms and see how the Deva kingdom makes up forms and provide analysis of their modes of building. From this, the scientific workers and the psychologists will be able to relate the subhuman kingdoms with the human kingdom through right interplay of forces. For education, science should not just be STEM-based, but provide a means for mental framework for observing inner and outer planes and all its phenomena. A mental orientation and thinking can be applied toward activity of all the seed groups. Mental meaning going away from the astral, going away from reactivity. For us esotericists in meditation, people that are connecting with the Buddhic plane are bringing forth pure reason and overcoming reactivity in the astral body. We've also talked about the philosophy of science and sustainability and which is crucial in tackling many problems related to protecting the environment and finding solutions for curbing or eliminating pollution, and for man to become a caretaker and steward of the earth. This could become a change for changing man's attitude from having dominion over the earth to becoming its steward. How science must partner with government and religious leaders and people of industry to get funding for projects and products that are sustainable and that benefit mankind. We must continue to be focused with our service and work to be open to impulses from the soul and hierarchy without getting lost in partisan politics and separative consciousness. This is a call and an appeal for us to use our creative energies for supporting right human relations in all our activities and relationships across all the seed groups. The major problems confronting humanity will not be overcome unless we have leaders with vision and courage, including those in the field of science. We are the vanguard of the new world and the Aquarian mind by facilitating and enabling and encouraging all forms of creativity, building people together in cooperation toward creating in whatever project we put our minds to. So next month's talk will be on seed group 9, the financiers and economists, as the financiers of this financial services group. So if you have any questions or comments, please let them come out now, please.
Okay, yeah, we have a couple of comments here, but I just want to point out that next month's group on financiers and economists is actually going to be on the 7th of May. So it's the first Saturday and instead of the second Saturday like we normally do them. And
Okay.
That's because of the conference.
Great, okay.
So, all right. Getting back to one of the earlier discussions,
yes.
Yvonne says, doesn't eliminating higher vibrations, as we talked about with Salandria, interfere with free will?
Interesting question. I'll try to be brief with that. Okay. All of us are at all of us have free will. We're at a neutral point right there with free will. We can choose to use this pencil or this pen for writing truth and positive things into the world, or we can use the pen or the pencil for writing negative things in it. I have a choice in this. So that's an example of the use of free will. So when a person is spiritually motivated, he or she, spiritually meaning that they're connecting with the soul, perhaps higher, going up to the spiritual triad, etc., they will be driven by impulses from the soul, hierarchy guides, etc., toward doing things that benefit individuals, benefits the group, benefits society. People that are not motivated that way will do things that they can still use their free will towards possibly selfish ends, toward things that only involve me or my own family only. I don't care what happens to other people type mentality. So those are examples of that, how free will, but free will, when a person becomes more spiritually oriented, when all of the seed group members, or I should say the spokespersons that are speaking for all the seed groups, regardless of their discipline, when they start speaking truth and spirit coming from a spiritual viewpoint themselves, we will have a new understanding. We will be impressed with a new understanding of right human relations and ethics and harmlessness. So I hope that answers that question.
And that's all I see right now.
So again, this presentation, I know I put a lot of information out as I typically do. This presentation will be available on the website a little bit later today. And you can go to, I had another slide here, which I didn't have time to go into, but it basically talks about the sciences of esotericism. Basically, it's just an overview: the science of the soul, the science of cosmic fire, esoteric psychology, rheology, esoteric astrology, esoteric healing, the science of invocation. All of these are articulated and detailed in the works of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan. And I just basically briefly gave an overview of these in this slide.
And yes, the slides are available there, and I'll post this as soon as I can. So as
Great.
David said, it should be available later on today on the Makara site. So I guess we're done then. See you all next week.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually next month.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry.
right. On May 7, I think you said May 7, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
May 7 at this time of day. Thank you for all and your interest, and keep reading the materials. I'll take care now. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.